Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your push channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about comparing Western media news outlets. One is the globalist controlled mainstream media channel or outlet, and another one is an independent one, still Western, still American in this case, but it's an independent one, quite substantial, and it's got a presence on cable TV and probably as much, if not slightly greater, presence online. So the mainstream media outlet and this outlet of, I guess, of approximately similar size. The mainstream media outlet receives government grants and funding, and they're a loss-making enterprise. They would go bust if it wasn't for NGO, George Soros type NGOs and taxpayer handouts, which goes to show that they exist for propaganda purposes and purveying it and fomenting it rather than delivering something that viewers and listeners want to take in. The other one, on the other hand, is gets by on its advertising and so on. So anyway, let's compare the stories. Now we're looking at two things here. One is how the stories are reported and how they're pitched, but just as much as anything, it's the choice of stories. So the choice of topics to cover. So with the mainstream media one, it becomes fairly evident straight away that they're selecting topics and carefully selecting topics and also writing about them in such a way as to be in full support of the globalist and the pro-globalist narrative. Nothing is spoken about, talked about, listed that's outside of the narrative. Everything is given over to the propaganda narrative that the globalists have determined, and the boys downtown sort of centrally script. Also, you look at the choice of reporters. Fanatical leftists or very young kids, where you get a different type of reporter on the on what I'd call a centrist channel, where the scope is far broader. They aren't given a script and saying stick to this, do this, produce this outcome. You can see that they're prepared to explore different ideas and give more nuance and balance to a story, which is a dead giveaway that one is a centrist and the other is a centrally scripted globalist channel. Now the Overton window has I don't know if it's moved or been dragged or is simply imagined to exist now, that those with extreme leftist views are now the centre of the debate and the discussion. And anyone that does not have those views is automatically a Nazi. Now, this channel, the other media channel, the non-globalist one that I'm going to refer to, or refer to their stories and reporting anyway in this essay. Much to my surprise, I looked them up on, or I saw that they had a Wikipedia entry that can't be written by them, so it's obviously written by the Wikipedia entry on this media outlet is written by the leftists who are tightly controlling what's said. So they claim that the channel is far right, it's racist, it's xenophobic, it's misogynist, it's fascist, with no neo-Nazi connections. So anyway, that's and these guys are moderate. I don't think I've seen anything that would be remotely fascist or Nazi or anything like that, or racist or anything at all. They come across as very centrist and moderate, certainly to my perspective at least. But I'm not some hysterical leftist, gender studies lesbian schoolgirl or something. So I might see it differently. But anyway, let's compare the stories. So now there's an international. They've made this one into an international headline. There's a peasant woman, so a dirt poor peasant woman from rural India has been killed by, allegedly, I don't know the details here, has been killed by 5 straight men. So the story is straight men oppressing women. So they've gone straight for the feminist angle here. Now they've pitched the woman as being loved by everybody and a genius and standing up for women's rights and living hand to mouth as a subsistence peasant. Now, bear in mind, in India, I mean, you need to just sort of get some perspective here. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of people die each year from things like snake bites. If you go to India, you're walking down the street, you will walk over dead bodies. They've got what's called a caste system there, CAST, a caste system, which is, if you like, a social ordering where you get the top caste, which are like the priestly class, the Brahmins, and they run everything, they own everything and control all the money, or pretty much all the money. And then you get the bottom class, which are the untouchables. They're people who've done terrible, according to the Indian customs, they're people who have done terrible things in their previous life, and they're now paying for that wickedness in the current life. So therefore, when they die on the street and they die of starvation and all this sort of thing, the other Indians just will walk over their bodies because they're untouchables. They're not even worth pissing on in the Indian context, at least. We may think that's outrageously harsh and unpleasant, but that's how their social system is ordered, and they think they're morally superior to us. So anyway, so this is a peasant woman in rural India who's killed by 4 or 5 men. So this has been seized upon now as an international headline to show how evil straight men are. These aren't even white men. So now the way it's written from the point of view of, and you see this sort of reporting often in the left, and not necessarily just the left or the globalists, but every story that they want to fan the flames of, they'll try and turn it into a human interest victim story. They'll try and weave it as that. So there was a child that was died in some illegal aliens making a very risky crossing of stormy seas somewhere, and it would be little Muhammad, his tiny little hands gripping the boat as he would have felt the waves enveloping him and sucking him under to his inevitable, terrible death. His little hand, his little voice cried out in the night, but unheard. His cries went unheard, and so on. Like that. So that type of reporting. Now, that's deliberate, sort of emotional type reporting, and thus, in my view, propaganda. But anyway, so that's the first one. So straight men bad. Next thing you know, Christianity is bad. The next story. Then the third story, Republicans are bad and evil. Global warming is everywhere and killing everybody, but anyone who denies it is a fascist Nazi. Mass migration of brown and black peasants to the West is only criticised and opposed by, drumroll, by Nazis. Nazis oppose it. Putin bad. Putin is more bad. Putin is even badder again. So succession of stories on Putin. The British royal family is bad because they oppressed Meghan Markle by doing terrible bad things, and they have known ties to Nazis and fascists. They do. Wow, I didn't know that. All right, now let's go to the stories by what I regard as the centrist or the non-globalist. We can call it a non-globalist controlled news outlet. Maybe that's a more telling sort of description. They're talking about how international child trafficking is being used, exploited by the people trafficking syndicates that are tied into the NGOs and so on to move children to the first world from the third world, then using, because if they're children, they're automatically sort of given safe haven residency And then their relatives can say, "Oh, I have to come over now because you've given temporary citizenship or residency status to my kid." And so there's all sorts of people smuggler scams being used there. Big bucks are changing hands. I don't think anyone is really unaware of this, but the globalists can't talk about it or allow it to be talked about, more to the point, because it then puts pressure on them to stop the flow of illiterate peasants to the West, and the globalists want as many black and brown people, desperately want as many black and brown people stuffed into the white West as they can possibly arrange, and so they must tightly control the narrative. So things like this international child trafficking, international people smuggling operation, they don't really want that talked about. And particularly not the implications of it, such as trafficking young women as brothel workers and things like that. Particularly given that some of these women are, or young women, again, will get you a great job in the West as a secretary and air-conditioned offices and living the Western lifestyle, and you're going to meet a handsome prince who's going to be very rich. You'll never need to work again. Young girls and the peasant girls in the East, Eastern Europe and elsewhere, they'll go down like a sack of shit for that sort of bullshit. So they're then brought over to the West, and they've got no sense of the reality of it all. They arrive and then they're told, "Oh, by the way, you owe us $10,000 for bringing you out here. So you better work it off by working in a brothel," that sort of thing. So I think that should be really stamped down on, and there should be vigorous attempts to stop that sort of thing. But there isn't, and nor do the globalists want it. There's a story about illegal aliens arriving in the West, committing gang rapes, and then having these shadowy NGOs pay all their legal bills, equaling many hundreds of thousands of dollars, all the way up to the superior courts to prevent their deportation. Comment on the EU government corruption scandals. Payments being made to EU politicians to among other things, lobby for third world and corrupt governments. There are 3.5 times more illegals flooding the US border this year than the same time last year. There's a story about a fanatical Trump hater and globalist-controlled alleged Republican who's been given a cushy job on CNN, which must have been organised, I think, probably a year ago, or at least opines the article. Comments on the Twitter censorship scandal, which is, by the way, one of the biggest media, government acting illegally scandals of our time, if not of the last 50 years. And here it is. None of the mainstream media reporting on it, but it's mentioned here. There's another story here about the number of criminals that seem to be, as in already convicted criminals that seem to be appearing in the illegal aliens crossing into the US border, and indeed people coming into the United Kingdom by boat across the Channel. So. The choice of stories that the centrist group, centrist media outlet is, they're pretty much all oppose in some way, directly or indirectly, or undermine indirectly the globalist narrative, which is why the globalist control media call them Nazis and everything. But none of it's, there's no wow factor reporting in any of this stuff. There's no little Muhammad's tiny little hands, right? There's none of that sort of reporting. There's none of that emotional type reporting. There's not human interest as victim as human interest type stories. It's pretty bland, if not banal, in the reporting. It's stating facts. 235,000 people illegally crossed the border into the US in the first 3 weeks of it, and that sort of thing. It's quite factual. And asking factual questions, where will these people go? Who's going to pay for all their upkeep? Why are the NGOs throwing so much money around on this. Why are they still being called charities when they're clearly political actors? Things like that, which are questions that anyone should ask or would ask or need to ask. But again, those sort of questions and those sort of stories run counter to the globalist narrative. So they don't want these sort of channels to exist, and they don't want that sort of information out there. But looking at the facts, that which station is reporting the facts, which is doing so in an unemotional manner, and which station or which media outlet is using emotion to replace facts and reality. And it's fairly clear, the globalist controlled media is nothing but wall-to-wall propaganda by, again, the selection of stories and how they're reported. And how it's all tightly coordinated. You look at any of these globalist controlled mainstream media outlets, whether it be in Britain, Canada, Australia, the US, New Zealand, anywhere, they stick tightly to that same script. Well, you don't see that same coordination with the centrist ones. The centrist ones will pick different stories, they'll report it differently. The facts will be the same, of course, but they'll report it differently, and in suggesting or implying or clearly outlining that they have an independent position on reporting the news, whereas the globalists don't. They're all tightly built around the same script. You've been a Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.